So good afternoon. Welcome back to the afternoon session for Finished Vehicle Logistics Import Export Conference. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Neemish. I'm the conference manager here. And hope you all had a good, enjoyable lunch. Managed to meet some old friends and maybe make some new ones as well. Firstly, I'd like to just take a little straw poll. Of course, we're here in Baltimore and there's the Crab Fest going on. So I just wanted to see how many people are actually going to the Crab Fest tomorrow. So quick hands up. Okay, great. Thanks. So this afternoon session starts off, we spoke this morning about a lot of infrastructure development and what's happening in terms of investment, where those funds are going and what we need to do in terms of developing that infrastructure for the future. So I guess this afternoon session is more about what we're going to do to optimize flow and drive efficiencies for today and, of course, for tomorrow as well. So we've pulled together a very good and experienced panel with Brian Mason, Patrick Foran from Hyundai Glovis, and Michael D'Angelo from Volkswagen. So what I'll do is just kick off, and we'll start off with Brian, and he's got a short presentation. So Brian has actually recently joined Pasha after retiring from Toyota Motor Sales, where he served for 31 years in a wide variety of executive assignments, including information systems, finance, distribution, and finished vehicle logistics. So I'll hand it over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Neemish. Thank you. Good afternoon. What we're going to talk about today is really share something about how Pasha manages vessel volumes and how we manage terminal congestion at some of our facilities. And if you think back to those of you that have been in the business for a while, I've been around, this is 32 years now. You know, it was great back when we did the single vessel arrival. Vessel came, it offloaded. And then we suddenly, in more recent times, started having multiple vessel arrivals, you know, even bordering on ship bunching. And now what we're seeing is really big vessel arrivals. And they're starting to get large vessels. And I was impressed that I think at the Glovis conference a couple of weeks ago, Glovis announced they've got 4 vessels they're launching between now and 2017 that have over 7,000 unit capacity. They're going to be put in service. So that for a processor working at a port terminal, that starts to bring some real challenges into mind. So when we look at the different models, here was our original model where vessel came up, discharged in the FPR area. We processed that into the rail and truck. Rail and truck did their job. We had a clear terminal. Those are the good days. The next was really we got into the higher frequency. And suddenly you had one vessel come in, and right behind it you had another vessel come in. FPR got a little bit more crowded, you know, but we were still able to process that through, get it out the door, get the rail and truck guys to help us. And then we had the larger vessels. And the larger vessels come in and they really filled up your FPR area. And then the other one came in and it filled up your FPR area. And it took a little while longer to process those into rail and truck. And instead of getting them out real quickly and efficiently, it usually took a couple of rail and truck loops to get that cleared out. And then we have our bunching. This is the last one, I promise. Where we basically have the FPR fills up, next vessel comes in, FPR fills up, and then another vessel comes in, and it anchors because it's got to sit there for a while until we clear an FPR space for it. And we're depending on that truck and rail to clear out that terminal, and now finally it can discharge, lift anchor, and it can go. So that's kind of where we're starting to get with terminals today. So I'll ask a question. It was funny, somebody before the session said, one of the good things about my sessions is I ask and answer my own questions. But I always give people a chance. But does anybody have some ideas on what key factors really contribute to marine terminal congestion? Anything? Give me a hand. Maddie, give. Okay. Lack of size. Yeah, size matters. Yeah, not so much. Not so much. Really, it's, and we have a lot of OEMs, we have a lot of people come to us and say, you need more space. You've oversold this facility. You have too many cars flowing through. And when we really look at it and really look at the science and really look at the statistics around that, it really comes down to more vehicle velocity moving through the terminal and vessel bunching that's contributing to our congestion the most. We have a beautiful facility in San Diego. Sometimes we think it's like a resort because the cars come and they stay and they stay and they stay and they don't want to go home or on to their next owner, wherever they're supposed to go. But it's something where, when we have really good terminal flow and we have vessels that come in and all the vehicles on that vessel are already dealer assigned, we can usually process those off within 5 days, and we're in good shape. The challenge is when we come in and a whole vessel of 3,000 or 4,000 units comes in, and all of a sudden, none of it's assigned, and it sits, and it sits, and it gets old, and for the terminal operator, yes, we make money on it because we're doing maintenance. We're doing battery maintenance and tire maintenance and washing it once a month and doing some other things, but that's really not the kind of business we want. We want good flow. As these units start to dwell, and it could be for a number of reasons, and we've seen all of these, the slow allocations, sometimes it's parts holds, sometimes it's stop sales. It really starts to just exponentially make the terminal worse. And it doesn't take very many cars on a large terminal to kind of become that rock in the middle of the stream that everything has to flow around and really start to slow things down. So that's some of the things that we really have to look at. The other thing, and I touched on this out in California at the last Finished Vehicles Conference, and that is both the factory and the dealer storage is somewhat constrained. And I think we were all happy when Teresa earlier from PwC said, hey, great, we're going to still hang on to this 17 million SAR for at least another year before it goes down to 16 million. And remember back in 2008 when we thought 16 million was pretty good. We're all happy with that. But what we're seeing now is that especially with some of the large metro area dealers that sell a lot of the vehicles, their footprint hasn't expanded. They haven't gotten any bigger since this big boom started. So they're looking at terminals and rail facilities as kind of their offsite storage, and they're metering the cars in based on that. And the same thing with the factory. When the factory runs out of storage, they push the vehicles out early. We used to get Hawaii vehicles on the San Diego terminal about 2 weeks before the vessel departed, which was a nice smooth flow. Now we get them up to about a month in advance. We don't need them a month before the vessel departs. But the factory doesn't have a place to put them, so they send them to us. So it's something where all of those things really contribute to some of the terminal congestion we're seeing. The other thing we're seeing is that we have quite a number of large OEMs, but we also have some medium to small size OEMs. And in the past, these OEMs dropped just 400 or 500 vehicles at a single place. And we always had room for 400 to 500 vehicles. If you talk to my boss, John Pasha, we're never full at Pasha. We always got a place for your cars. But what started happening is those vehicles started co-loading, and the vessel companies got better at building those co-loads and building those loads up. So instead of coming in with 400 to 500 vehicles, they're coming in with 1,500 or 2,000 vehicles. And so we're having to work a little bit harder to find a first point of rest for them when they come in that size. And one of the reports, something we look at, is basically this is how we portray our vessel arrival. And this is actually very recent, just last week. We had 9,130 units arriving in 3 to 4 days at one terminal. That's 41% of our total on-terminal capacity. So I don't know of many terminals that have 41% of their terminal available, except Grays Harbor. So if anyone needs facility space, we have plenty at Grays Harbor. Penny's in the back, she can talk to you. But it's something where when you have a situation like that, you've got to start talking to the vessel companies, got to start talking to the OEMs and start spreading that out. And that's one of the things we've tried to do and have been having really some good success with. And I credit a lot of this to our operations, our director of operations, Graham Fee, has really kind of spearheaded this in working with a lot of the different vessel companies and working with them to lay out schedules, try to stick to schedules, and try to meter the ships in at a pace that we can take those ships. And it gives the ships a chance to, if they need to, they can slow down, save some fuel, and not get there. Because sometimes we had 4 vessels racing to get in to get that first spot, and 3 out of the 4 lost. So we're trying to meter that out, and it is getting better, and that is working well. We've put a lot of emphasis. This is our 30-day terminal activity chart, and as you can see, the yellow is the arrivals, the orange, blue, and gray are the departures. And so you can see the real spikes in the arrivals. And that's where we see the ship bunching. That's where we see a lot of vehicles just piling into the yard. And you can see the green line is basically our inventory on a daily basis. So huge erratic swings in that inventory. So, and one of the things we're looking at too is below the line, when you're looking at those departures, one of the big things is, typically when you release a car, you expect the trucker to come get it in 3 days or less. We're seeing truckers take as long as 5 and 6 days to do that. And just that extra 1 or 2 days for truck away is really starting to impact us. And so it's something where we're kind of reaching out to the trucking community. And in some cases it's shortages of trucks, but in most cases it's not. In most cases it's just another mechanism to kind of slow the vehicles down, going to dealers who have a lot of stock. And so they'll leave it in our really last point of rest area for a few more days. And this is kind of a good way to just look at actual shipments and arrivals in total, and you can see how erratic that is. And when you're trying to, the term that we used to use at Toyota was, you want this nice smooth Hyjunka flow of vehicles through the terminal. It's really hard to have a nice smooth Hyjunka flow when you have that kind of change up and down in terms of the arrivals and the departures. So we're working, trying to work with labor. We're trying to work with a lot of different groups. One of the challenges is when you have this many vessels come in, you're competing for labor within your same port. So in San Diego, sometimes we can have 3 vessels in and we can have plenty of labor, but if it's in at the same time as a cruise ship and one of the dole ships and some other project cargo is in at the same time, then we've got to kind of really scramble to try to get enough longshore to get that vessel offloaded. So kind of our lessons learned is, number 1, collect and publish vessel schedule information, including arrivals, volumes, everything, to everybody. Make sure everyone knows what's coming in, what's the ship ahead of them, what's the ship behind them, and get them to stick to that schedule. We've had a couple of times where people called us and said, hey, our vessel's 4 days ahead of schedule, and we said, tell it to slow down. Literally tell it to slow down, because if I take your vessel 4 days early, then the 3 vessels that come in behind you that come in on schedule are going to have a problem. So, come in on schedule. Stick to that schedule if you can. We also communicate being listed on the schedule is not a reservation. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to get in on that day, especially if we have labor challenges or things like that, but we work really, really hard to try to get you in on that day. And then meet with those marine carriers and the OEMs together and establish SOPs for arrivals, establish SOPs for reporting and communicating and changes, and communicate those FPR issues immediately to those impacted stakeholders. And this is really how we manage space. We're trying to establish really good on-terminal dwell targets for each one of our OEMs and really working with them to try to help them make those dwell targets. where we need to, provide off-site storage. We've got almost 90 acres of off-site storage in San Diego. I think Penny probably has at least 75 to 100 acres that's accessible to her up in Grays Harbor. So it's something where always have a place for those vehicles that come in that the OEM is going to come to you and say, there's a part missing, there's something missing on this vehicle, it's going to sit for 45 days before I can move it. Then let's get it off the main terminal, get it out of the way, and we can handle the rest of the cargo. Communicate that status frequently. And the next thing is really look for new terminal opportunities, and that's something Pasha is really working to do this year. This month, we're actually opening up 2 terminals, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast. On the West Coast, we're opening up San Francisco Pier 80. It's 70 acres on the main terminal, has 4 berths. 45 acres is near terminal, which is easy drive shuttle, less than a quarter mile. There's 2 large buildings for warehousing and processing, really good highway access, great facility, and it's right in downtown San Diego. It's right next to the new ballpark. So it's really a nice premier location, and we're actually going to take the first ship this month. And then one of the big things here that is exciting to be here in Baltimore is that we partnered with a company called TradePoint Atlantic. They're a developer, and they're developing the whole Sparrows Point area in Baltimore. And it used to be Bethlehem Steel and a large shipbuilding industry, and they've got about 3,000 acres there. And Pasha has partnered with them to really open up a whole new terminal space that has never been available on the East Coast before. And it's really exciting right now to see something go from the drawing board and from the plans to something that's real. And we're seeing phase 1 is now complete. The first 22 acres is paved, the berth is ready. Soon to be followed on by phase 2 and 3 out to a full 200 plus acres. The whole Sparrows Point development is over 3,000 acres and has over 100 miles of rail track on the facility. Huge facility, huge potential for both automotive, break bulk, container, everything else. There's room, I think, for everything out there. But we're really excited about it. And this is what it looks like. These are not photoshopped. You can see the berth access, you can see the new road to the 22 acres of the first phase 1. There's a medium-sized PIO building in our truckaway area. That's a little closer look at the PIO building. And you can see the berth access, brand new road to the terminal. And one of the really nice things about our terminal here is that we have dual rail. We have both NS and CSX on the property, and that rail is being built as part of phase 2 and 3. But that will give the OEMs a real competitive choice between not 1 but 2 different Class 1 railroads. And I always have to end, I didn't know Louis was not going to be here, but I always have to put in a slide where I make fun of Louis a little bit. So I'd heard about this all-new personal PCTC was now available, and the first customer was Louis. I put him in a nice suit, at least. Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. That must be a really old picture of Louis. I'm sure it's, or is it that the camera adds a few pounds?
It's his head.
Maybe
someone else's body.
Yeah. It's a good example there of private sector investment. We spoke earlier about the whole need for more investment there, so that's a good example, not just in terms of the port capacity, but also the connectivity to those ports as well, which is equally as important as making sure that we've got enough room and the ports are operating efficiently as well. So I'd like to now bring Patrick to the stage. Patrick has over 25 years experience in finished vehicles finished vehicle logistics. Prior to his current position at Glovis America, Pat was Vice President of Operations at Global Auto Processing Service, which was a wholly owned Glovis America subsidiary.
Thank you, Neemish. Thanks, everyone. And, first thing I'd like to do is start off by thanking you again. Many of you have helped me over the years. For the last 16 years, my job has been to ship cars for the Hyundai Automotive Group to dealers. Dealers first in the United States and then expanding across North America. So I want to thank you. Many of you have helped me, your companies have helped me, or you stand ready to help me. And in all cases, I thank you, because it's a privilege working with people in this industry. We work with an awful lot of very classy men and women, and I just wanted to thank you for all of those efforts over the years. There's several facilities that I've been involved in, and as far as capacity issues and what you're looking at for a facility, well, the most important thing is getting your vehicles to the marketplace, getting them to dealers. This happens to be the Philadelphia port operation that we have. It's just 90 miles from here. The facility handles 160,000 vehicles a year right now, over a 13-state service area, the Northeast Corridor, almost 75 million customers in that service area. So it's very, obviously, very important. The building, our processing building there, is 72,000 square feet. Now, and every day, right now, we're getting out cars for Hyundai and Kia throughout that 13-state service area, about 700 cars a day through that facility. Another facility that I've been involved in handles a few more cars. This is the Vehicle Processing Center located at the Kia Motor Manufacturing Georgia plant in West Point. It handles 350,000 vehicles a year, and it ships throughout North America, throughout the USA, Canada, and Mexico. Infrastructure is critical. So at this site, we have 90 rail loading spots. We load bi-level and tri-level product out of here. This site has huge capacity for rail out shipment. As far as storage, there's over 20,000 vehicle storage spots at this location. And the main processing building, 120,000 square feet. The next facility that I've been involved in, it handles a few more vehicles. That's the Hyundai Motor Manufacturing Plant in Montgomery, Alabama. It handles over 390,000 vehicles a year. It also ships throughout the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The rail infrastructure is absolutely world-class. And if anybody wants to know who designed that, I'll be glad to introduce you to Alex McGregor later. I think he's out here. Transphone did a bang-up job there. The support yard as well, it can hold 198 rail cars. You need that when you're putting out volume. We've shipped out over 100 rail cars from this facility. The main processing building is also 120,000 plus square feet. The latest facility that I've been involved in is located in Pasqueria, Nuevo Leon, Mexico. This site is absolutely huge. It's approximately 2 miles by 1 mile. And that's the campus. That's the campus where all of the suppliers are at, the manufacturing facility, the vehicle processing center. There's other land there as well to develop. But just the current development, 2 miles by 1 mile, absolutely huge. And right now we're in our 3rd month of production there. And we're looking for a great future on that. Now, as far as facility selection, for us the most important thing, I think for anybody, is proximity to the marketplace. The closer you are to the center of the marketplace, the better off you are. We all know that inland freight costs are our highest expense. So if our ports are close to that center of market, that's a good thing, because that'll keep your costs down. Obviously, you need a transportation hub. Proximity to the highway system, your docks. How many docks do you have? Pasha's facility in National City is absolutely world-class. Those of you who have seen it know that. Can dock multiple ships at one time. Rail within a few hundred yards. FAPS has something very similar to that, rail close to the docks. That really helps moving cars to the marketplace. And what is your connectivity? Are you dual served? So that's good news about Sparrows Point. Glad to hear that. Labor is a critical element. You would think I would have labor as the first element here, but I don't, because labor is everywhere, and people are people. And there's good people everywhere, and there's people everywhere looking to perform and be part of a team. All you need to do is provide them the right leadership and the right accountability, and you can get the job done. What is the existing infrastructure? So you can do amazing things. You can get a budget of $25 million or $50 million, but we need to look at spending money smartly. We all know how much docks cost. We heard Rick Powers was talking about the investment here taking place in Maryland. A lot of money. It's a lot of money to build some of this infrastructure. So reusing existing structures is a really good way to go. Upgrading, reusing, repurposing. I think I've only seen a handful of purpose-built auto facilities. A lot of the facilities I've seen coast to coast have been repurposed facilities. They might have been World War II Navy sheds or out there for some other purpose, but they got a new life processing cars. How much vehicle processing floor space do you have? What does that floor look like? How much room it is? You know, are there any columns there? What is the column spacing? You need room to be able to conduct any kind of menu of services that any particular client would want. Inspections, parts, accessories, any sort of reworks. You need a warehouse for parts, but how big of a warehouse? Well, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you need a warehouse for your parts. Body shop, it's one of those things, unless there's those of us who are in the paint supply business, it's one of those things that none of us really like, but we all have because it's part of what we do. When we touch so many cars, inevitably, there's going to be dings, dents, and scratches that we have to take care of. Things like fuel island and car wash. You know, fuel island, we have to think even bigger now. We have to think about diesel. We have to think about electric vehicles. So how are we going to accommodate those? So I talked about a lot of facilities that I was involved in. And with some of those facilities, I was part of the team that came up with a design concept or modifications to the design. Well, the most important thing is, how are you going to ship your vehicles? Oh, I think I'm at the wrong, there we go. How are we going to ship our vehicles? So our mode of transport, our conveyance, is the most important thing in how we're going to design our facility. If everything is coming in or going out by truck, well then we need to give thought to how many truck rigs are going to come in the course of a day. So we looked at that Philadelphia slide, and Scott Goodwin, who's here today, he used to be my partner. Scott and I worked on a lot of projects. And so we, in that design of that Philadelphia facility, we both concurred that we were going to need at least 70-plus trucks a day routinely. So we knew that with timing, we better provide room for at least 35 truck rigs. But the volume dictated how many spaces that we needed for that. What's your mix between rail and truck? And of course, are your truck operations 24/7? We happen to be holding this conference in Baltimore, Maryland. So we're right in prime time here in the Northeast corridor. So we all know about the high area of population and traffic problems in this area. You know, our truck carriers, they like being able to deliver at night. There's about 1/3 of the dealers that I work for will take deliveries 24/7. So for the truck carriers, that's great news, because that means they can get their trucks moving during times when there's not a lot of traffic on the road, and they can make that delivery at night, drop the load. If you've got rail in the mix, are you a bi-level only, tri-level only facility, or do you have both? Why is that important? Well, for instance, I'll pick on that factory in Montgomery, Alabama. So it services 2 rail destinations in Mexico, 8 rail destinations in Canada, and 16 in the United States. So if you're just shipping out tri-level product, that kind of gives you a guide to how many active load lines you have. That is, load lines you're in the process of filling up. But if you got both product, you just doubled the number of active lines, load lines that you're filling up to be able to load your rail cars efficiently. For transportation space, you know, again, you want to think about, I think about things like how much room the truck carriers are going to need as a turning radius. You know, port property costs money. All property costs money. But not getting your cars to the marketplace costs you more money. So you got to make it work for everybody. That means your truck carriers need enough room to move their equipment in, turn it, stage it. If you got a rail operation, you got to think about other things, like where you're going to have are you doing the switching? Where's the locomotive going to be at? Place to marshal chalking equipment, other expendables that you'll need for the rail cars. In our business, vehicle warehouse space, it's parking lots are our warehouses. So what some people see as a parking lot, that's our warehouse. Now, all commodities, so if I'm selling kitchen appliances, I'm going to have a warehouse. I'm going to have distribution centers. If I run that business, I'm going to decide how big my warehouse will be. Well, in this case, in the auto business, all right, that's what I'm in, we're going to decide how big of a warehouse we need. And for us, the warehouses are those parking spaces. The anticipated storage needs are very important. The arrival plan, allocation cycles, and new models, they all affect that. The arrival plan is very important. An erratic schedule, crazy up and downs, 8,000 cars one month, but then 16,000 cars the next, or the arrival of 9,000 cars in a week. I think we've all felt that, or we've all heard about that kind of experience. We need to plan for contingencies, containment operations, or any quality type issues. So for facility design, how large of a building, how much of a building? I talked about these buildings that were 120,000 square feet in Georgia, and 120,000 feet in Alabama, 72,000 square feet in Philadelphia. Well, how much is big? What do you need? Well, this is what I do. Vehicle volume and the work scope are critical. So more work scope means you're actually going to have more space. So I made a really simple example here. 300,000 vehicles annually, 1 hour a vehicle, that's 300,000 work hours. That means you're going to have 1,250 work hours in a day. That means in your building, you need to have 157 vehicles being serviced at any one time. They're actually being serviced. So vehicles do not magically appear or disappear once a workman arrives to a vehicle or walks away from a vehicle. You actually have empty spots in a building at times. So I have, and you have to pardon my history education. I'm not an industrial engineer, and many times I've said that. I come up with what I call a vehicle movement factor. So I take 50% of what I need in the building and I create a movement factor to account for this. This is the time when a vehicle is complete, but the workman has moved on to another vehicle. This accounts for the time that the spot is empty or it's just being filled with a fresh vehicle. In this scenario, I need 235 positions in the building if I run a one-shift operation. If I run a two-shift operation, I need 118 vehicle positions in a building. In this type of case, a vehicle position, what am I counting? What's that? Well, for me, it's about 240 square feet. All right, and that's a vehicle position 20 feet long by 12 feet wide, because then I can get a tool cart around an entire vehicle. I can move around the vehicle without damaging it or the vehicle next to it. If you were to think about building sizes, you would say if you needed 100 vehicle positions, that would be 24,000 square feet you would need as far as work positions. But you also have to account for space to drive into that work area and drive out of it, and buffer around the side of that work area. That comes to almost 40,000 square foot total. The big variables to this are volume and work scope. You add work scope, you add more work, you're going to need more space. Less work, less space. So when you're looking for a building or designing a building, I try to look at more of a high watermark, because I don't want to have to make a multi-million-dollar investment only to go, oops, I should have done something else. Some other design factors that could affect how big your building is, of course, is whether you go with a conveyor process or with a static workflow. There's some advantages to both. A standard on a conveyor process, you need standard work. You need the same work being done to all of those cars. And you want to be able to divide it up kind of into equal workstations. So as that car progresses down, station 1 has about the same amount of time devoted to each vehicle. But a static flow, where you bring the vehicles in and park them, that allows you to have variations in work. So what if some cars get Bluetooth devices installed, and some get spoilers installed, or some have bumper appliques installed. You have different types of work being performed to cars. So it's not really conducive to a conveyor. Some additional items that I consider is first your parts warehouse. So for a parts warehouse, we talked about a warehouse, so I look in a building. Does this building have enough parts warehouse for me? Well, what's the anticipated daily pallet consumption? What safety stock do I need to hold? So how far away, how many days away is my parts distribution center that I'm getting those parts from? Areas for high volume items, and I have to consider warranty parts storage. Training in conference rooms are critical. If you're not, you need a place where you can actually train. You need a place where you can talk. Body shop we talked about, warranty repair area, lunchroom and break room. And I guess for me that also you need to consider other employee morale things like employee parking lot. Sounds mundane, but if you take care of you need to take care of the people who are doing the job for you. You've got to include that. Administrative and office areas. So I know Brian was looking at it more from a big picture, and I was kind of looking at it more from minutia. But it's sort of what I wind up doing often to make sure that we're building the right facility, and that hopefully we're putting it in the right location. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Patrick. It's interesting to see the details that go into planning these facilities, which... So next, I'd like to introduce Michael, and bring Michael up to Michael D'Angelo, who recently joined the Volkswagen Group America's Vehicle Logistics Department in 2008, and is responsible for the daily operations of their northeastern port in Davisville.
So good afternoon. First, I'd like to echo Patrick's praise for the service providers who are here today. You really do make our jobs that much easier, so thank you. Now, we had big picture, we had small picture. I'm going to take in a completely different direction altogether. When I first read the description for this session, the most current example of a transportation hub that improves efficiencies and reduces costs that jumped out in my mind was the Panama Canal and the recent expansion. Christopher mentioned in his opening remarks today that it just opened up. And I'm sure everyone in this room understands what the canal means to our industry and why the expansion is a positive. The canal represents an interesting case study, however, as we look for new connections and new hubs. Without a doubt, the addition of the third set of locks in Panama will certainly allow for faster transits, lower costs, and larger volumes per ship. However, the expansion of the canal will also bring a new set of challenges for shippers, processors, and carriers. This past March, I was fortunate enough to pay a visit down to the canal, and I wanted to share with you a few of my learnings from the Canal Authority, who provided a tour and presentation. Some of these slides are from that presentation, so if you don't agree with the figures, you can blame them. Okay. So this is a map that outlines all the country's ports and routes that the canal serves. 160 countries, 144 routes, and 1,700 ports. It's been arguably the most important hub of this century, certainly to North America. This past expansion is the first in the canal's history. I found that fairly interesting. I figured in 100 years there'd be additional work, but no. So it's a very important expansion that just occurred. Very quickly, I just wanted to show you the flow of vessels as they go through the canal. A vessel can either enter the Pacific to the north or the Atlantic to the south, and it takes roughly 9 hours to navigate the canal. About 40 vessels per day can go through the canal. Now, what's interesting is the expansion only adds one set of locks. The original canal had 2 sets of locks. So the amount of vessels that go through won't increase that dramatically, maybe 10 vessels a day. But the total tonnage that goes through will increase significantly thanks to the larger vessels that can now pass. There's a lot on this chart, but I'd like to draw your attention to the upper left. It shows the vessels over the decades and the vessel sizes. And from 1955 until today, total tonnage has increased over 5-fold. So yes, an expansion was certainly needed. We do have about 14,000 passages per year annually since 2006. Last year was a little down compared to other years, but still a strong figure. Volume was the strongest in 2015 by Panama Canal tonnage units. The bottom 2 charts indicate different commodities that pass through the canal. As we can see, automotive is a relatively small percentage. We like to think that we're the most important industry out there, but we are far behind container and dry bulk. And when you combine the two tankers together, they're above us as well. So again, about 15% of total annual passages is automotive, which comes to about six vessels per day. Okay, this next slide shows more of size and what the canal can now handle. The upper canal shows the original, and the lower is the newer. We do have 70 more feet in width and 400 feet by length. Now, Neemish, it's 22 meters and 120 meters, to give you a comparison. You're welcome. The chart on the right here is interesting. It shows on the left the percentage of the fleet that can pass through the canal today at around 97.5%. In 2019, that figure drops to about 94.5%. So the canal expanded, but less of the fleet in 2019 can pass through it. What does that tell us? It tells us that the fleet is getting larger than the current canal the new canal can handle. So what does that tell us? Perhaps a new expansion is going to come soon. Okay. Oh, and this picture shows the 2 canals on the Pacific Access Channel right next to each other. The left is the original locks, and the right is a new set of locks. So they're right next to each other. I found that pretty interesting as well. This photo here was taken in Davisville. The vessel on the left is the new Panamax. It's an NYK. It's the Irish leader. And to the right is the Panamax, the older vessel, and that's the K-Line's Oregon Highway. The figures below show roughly what these vessels are capable of handling. As discussed earlier, the new Panamax can handle roughly 7,000 vehicles, which is about 10 to 15% more than the older vessels. Okay. So just some more photos to give you a glimpse of what the canal looks like. The upper left is the original canal, made up of a system of gates. One gate will drop water into the next lock, and the vessel will pass through. The upper right shows a vessel passing through the Lake Aton, and the bottom vessel shows the 2 locks side by side, with multiple smaller boats in the locks. Again, more of the same. The photo on the right is a nice visual of how the vehicles raise and lower. So I mentioned earlier that the canal offers an interesting case study and potential challenges as we look to new hubs and new connections. First and foremost, larger vessel pressures processors, carriers, and dealers. If your arrival schedule looks like you just got done with an intense workout, you're going to have challenges. Brian showed something like this in his presentation, and it is a reality. In Newport this past June, we heard Sarah Miko from Jack Cooper talk about the years of the fat cow and how investment is important when times are good. And certainly now is the time for investment to address issues that Brian mentioned in his presentation. Secondly, we heard from Brandon Mason in June as well, and Teresa Ann this morning, sharing the volume that's going to be coming in production, 110 million by 2022 globally. So these vessels are larger, they're coming more frequently, and it's going to put pressures on our infrastructure, certainly. Now, while this growth is positive, all stakeholders, from processors to OEMs to carriers, need to make the necessary adjustments to increase throughput, or else the advantages we gain from the canal expansion are lost once these vehicles hit land. Now, I'm not advocating building the church for Easter Sunday, but our dealers have come to expect a certain level of performance from us, and they're not going to accept that we can't process vehicles quicker because the boats are bigger and they're coming faster. It's not going to fly. Now, if our processors carriers do not scale to match the increase in factory production and vessel arrivals, then bottlenecks will occur in our ports and railheads. Now, enhancing fleets and expanding port operations isn't always feasible, and it's certainly not an immediate solution. So what is? One of the things I love about my job is I get to communicate with people from almost every department in my company and multiple service providers every single day. With increased volumes, we have to have increased communications. It's absolutely critical. First, we have to get our port processors in the loop of what's going on. When's the volume coming? How do we staff appropriately? And what do we do if space runs out? Production. When is this volume coming? When do we expect these spikes? When are the factories shut down? This is information we have to communicate further down the chain. Finance. How much money do we have to spend this quarter? What do we have luxury, or is it a period of tightening the belt? What are our financial goals that quarter, that year? The carriers, they need to be kept up to speed of spikes, launches, model year changeovers, holds. The more information they have, the better they can size. Finally, our sales and regions, they tell us which markets are soft, which models are selling, what we can hold on to a little bit longer. If we hit the right models and the right cars, perhaps we can go a little bit longer on other vehicles to buy some more time. Finally, barriers to increased velocity and throughput. We often look at barriers as immovable restrictions. An exercise I like to employ myself is, what would I do if I had a blank canvas? If I did not have to worry about cost, time, infrastructure, contractual restrictions, unions, labor shortages, company policies, the list goes on. If I had a utopia, what would I do? And what I find is, if I build that model and determine ways to incorporate as much as I can with what I have, small improvements over time do make a difference. Barriers often stop a great idea before it has a chance to incubate. But if you keep that blank canvas in your head, you will find ways to overcome it. Now, knowing we don't live in a utopia, I'd like to ask the panel the first question of the day. Is model year 17 changeover? 16 still have to sell down before we can release the model year 17s. 2 vessels inbound to your West Coast port, Brian, approximately 3,500 units total, both 2 days away. Your yard is at 95% capacity. You can only hold 1,000 more vehicles. 2 questions. What do? How do you prevent it?
First answer is we have plenty of room at Pasha. We're never full. We're never full. So bring those vessels in, but we'll see if we can probably meter them in one at a time and move some product so we can make some space for them. But it's a complicated dance that we do. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michael, and thanks for setting the stage for our Q&A. So, as Michael set the scene for and ask Brian the question of what's happening with this scenario that's Michael laid out. I think we should also add in a few more parameters to this as well. So I'll ask you guys to add some, bring some other, bring something else to the mix. What are the challenges that this scenario might potentially face as well?
Well, Neemish, it could be month end as well, and we've got to do an extra wholesale push or additional accessory application to the vehicles. That always sweetens it up a bit.
Okay.
How about quarter end in the winter in the Northeast?
All right. How about a power outage and your systems have gone down?
But Neemish, one of the things that we've all lived through terrible month ends and the so-called impossible job. And I say so-called because the men and women that I've had the privilege of working with over the years have always been able to rally and have been able to come up with an answer to that so-called impossible job. The biggest ally we have is communicating with each other and working together as a team. So that's, Brian talked about that with the marine operations, regular marine ops meetings, talking about the operations aspect and the planning aspect. Hey, how many cars are we going to be bringing in next month? And that just ties right in with what are the wholesale goals? Hey, we're going to switch this service area from truck to rail. Oh, what's the impact on that? The more information you can provide that we can share with each other, and I say with each other because it's not all just about the manufacturer, distributor. It works the other way. What the railroads can share with us, what the trucking companies can share, the port operators can share. All of things change all the time, but one of the things that I've always liked to do is have routine meetings because then it keeps the business routine. There aren't surprises, and when the crazy thing does happen, we all know each other well and we're working as a team. But just my suggestion, Neemish.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, and I think the one comment I would make is that nothing is impossible, but nothing is free. And so, the response to those several thousand vehicles coming in when you only have 1,000 spaces is you've got to do a massive consolidation. You've got to move cars around. That requires labor, and I can't charge back for that labor. I can't charge an OEM to move their car just to make space for another OEM's vehicle. I as a processor, I end up eating that cost. And so that's, at that point, it starts digging into my operations. And some of the best months we've had in the last year have been the lowest volume months in terms of financially. And some of the worst months we've had in the last couple of years have been the highest volume months because we have to do so much consolidation, we have to expend so much labor to make room for that next vessel. And so, if we can get back to that kind of smooth Hyjunka flow and easing those vehicles in at a reasonable, moderate pace, and getting all the vessel companies and everyone to play, it is just a much more efficient and profitable operation for everyone, and that's the OEMs, the carriers, the terminal operators, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the panel, or anybody want to add something else into the mix here?
You did any worse than you did it already.
Come on. So let me ask you a question. You're faced with this situation, and you've got a host of service providers that you work with. You've got your competitors or from other processors that you might work with. How would you communicate with them, and what?
I think the first thing you want to find out is from number one, do both of those vessels belong to the same OEM? I hope they do. But if they don't, then you've got to find out individually from each OEM, what's the priority for those vehicles? And in some cases, it may not be really high. If that OEM already has 3 or 4 or 5,000 vehicles on my terminal, they've probably got enough vehicles to fill their wholesale targets for the month. We can probably meet their wholesale targets, and everything's good. However, if they don't have enough vehicles, if it's a premium vehicle, if it's a fairly new launch vehicle, where we get really concerned is if it's either a launch or a service training vehicle, or it's a vehicle that's going to go to an auto show, or that is a hot vehicle that's specifically for one dealer. That's where we try to go to extraordinary measures to try to get the vessel in and get that ship offloaded. But first, determine what the priority is on those vehicles to see, is this really an emergency? It might look like an emergency, and it may not be. It may not be. It may be okay with one of those OEMs if you say, can I slow it down for a couple of days? If it's close to month end, they're both going to probably want to get that ship in. But
Brian, I think there's another complication to that, because you could have multiple manufacturers sharing a vessel too. And that can even, it's something that I'm lucky with right now. I can put my blinders on. All I care about are 2 brands, Hyundai and Kia. But it can really make the mix a little tough. And Brian's point is quite right. Service and then extraordinary services, and extraordinary services aren't free. If something's asked for, it adds cost. That's why that consistency coming out of the factory, the consistency on arrivals. We all know about sales trends and that sort of things, and new models, and so inventories can at times balloon up a bit. But it's really about communication and planning. And then I think working jointly with service providers to come up with smart solutions that, remember, it's all about getting cars to the dealer. And when I spend money, I want to spend it where I'm getting that car to the dealer. Anything that kind of, deviates from that, I don't like it. But sometimes you have to do what's necessary to take care of the product.
Yeah, I'd agree, Pat. It's communication, it's planning. For us, when the vessel gets to the port, it's too late. You need to be looking at what's on that vessel the moment it leaves the factory. And from there, you can determine what type of work is needed, if it's a hot unit, if it can wait. In a situation that we're covering now, our goal is to get the low-hanging fruit, get the volume out quickly to make room, and then we can address what's needed. Hopefully it's not month end where those sold cars aren't needed. If they are, we're looking at potentially doing something with the options, whether it's changing them out to something that's easier to add on to, or more extreme measures. Bringing in extra haulers to help out as well, to get that volume out quicker, and utilize potentially load lanes for some space as well.
yeah, I think you asked me what questions I would ask. The other question I would ask is, are these vehicles assigned? When they hit the bottom of the ramp, are they assigned? Do I have a dealer code and someone I can actually do the work on that vehicle that week and ship those vehicles and get them off the terminal, or are they unassigned? And are they going to join a vast population of additional unassigned vehicles that are already on the terminal? Because that really makes it a completely different ballgame if you're trying to come in with a vessel that's 100% assigned versus unassigned.
Sure. We've got a question at the front here, please.
Just a quick question, kind of following on this unassigned question, Brian, because you pointed to dealers and OEMs using the lots as kind of an off-site extended dealer or plant, kind of as a consequence of growth. But are you maybe seeing some worrying trends that actually it's a little bit the opposite, that rather than growth, it's that this stuff is piling up because it's not selling, and that there's a bit of an inventory buildup that's perhaps a little bit reminiscent of what we've seen in the past, right? Back in the last crisis. And in the UK, we've seen some big inventory builds up that has caused a bit of worries and things. So I'm just wondering if A, there's any signs of this from your point of view, and B, if that communication you're talking about can go, and this is for the OEMs to comment as well, can click back to the plants to sort of raise the flag and say, hey guys, you know, we're doing it again. Can we think twice?
I think and I've been through a couple of these cycles in the industry, and I think when we see a systemic problem, you see it almost across the board with all OEMs, and I will say we're not seeing that right now. We are seeing very specific OEMs and nameplates that are building stock and moving a little bit slower. And at the same time, we're seeing other OEMs who are performing very, very well, moving through the terminal. Vehicles get off the vessel, they're processed in 5 to 6 days, and they're out. So it is really not that I see so far a systemic problem. I see it as really probably just a few OEMs that are having challenges, and whether they're sales challenges, whether they're production challenges. It's also having been through 30 years of model year changeovers, there's always a move where you're going to shut down the plant for up to 2 weeks, and to build up to make up for that, you build up a little bit of a safety stock. And so almost everybody did plant shutdown in July, and so it's pretty normal in July and in June to see a pretty big jump in arrivals, which we saw, and June was a huge month for us. But it's at the same time, then you go that 2-week lag where you get almost nothing. We don't see it as much at our end because it's metering out of the plants, but it does happen if you look at it overall, and August is usually a pretty low month volume-wise, and then it'll pick right back up. In fact, I even made a couple of phone calls to some OEMs saying, gosh, your August volumes and July volumes, looked low, and they're like, no, it'll pick right back up again next month. And we're seeing that on the vessel schedules. It's spiking back up. So I don't think it's systemic right now.
Chris, regarding that, I just want to comment, that for us, the warehouse space for a vehicle is what other people look at as parking lots. So what we need in our warehouse, or again, what other people see as a parking lot, it's not. Some people may say, oh, well, look, they've got so many cars there, and those cars aren't moving as fast as we think. Well, that's, without being disrespectful, it's a little presumptuous to say that. It's up to us what we have in our warehouses, and so for us, it's that's what that is. Somehow the times our vehicle warehouse gets a little thin, and then sometimes it has a few more cars. And I think some of the seasonality that Brian mentioned, it very, very much plays into it. I think also fuel prices and how that, I recall a few years ago when gasoline went over $4 a gallon in a lot of parts of this country, trucks and SUVs, wow, they weren't selling. Well, we have a little bit of a different condition right now, so it's having a different effect on the marketplace. But those trends tend to work themselves out, and so I think that too, it ultimately comes down to a matter of communication and coordination with the service providers. Hey, we need extra warehouse space. What are we going to do? How can we best do this where we can get the biggest bang for our buck? How do we do this where it's promotes vehicle quality, but maybe even gets our cars closer to the marketplace?
Yeah, so I tend to agree with what Brian and Patrick said. The last thing you want to do is shut down the factory. You want to push that onto the sales and logistics teams to solve the problem. In terms of a complete slump, no, we don't see that, perhaps in a few markets, perhaps with a few models. On the contrary, we're making investments in Mexico with the Q5 facility, and in Chattanooga, our expansion to build a new SUV, reacting to those trends in the market where we're seeing lower fuel prices and a higher demand for SUVs. So it takes time to transition to meet those trends, and that's probably part of what you're seeing now.
The other thing I'd add is that at the same time all this is going on, we're opening new facility on the West Coast, new facility on the East Coast, and there's huge interest in both of those facilities by OEMs. And both of those are actually filling much faster than we had anticipated. And so we're very excited about the interest that's been shown in both. But it's something where I think that demonstrates there is a continued market for that. One of the things that's interesting is we have seen more interest in some short sea coming up from Mexico, but also some of the traditional traffic coming from Asia and coming from Europe.
Sure. Okay. Do you have another? No?
Yeah.
Well, there's a question at the back there.
Hi. Would the panel think that it would be of interest to establish a standard report that shows the dwell at each of the ports, and it breaks it down into segmentation of vessel arrival to shippable vehicle and shippable vehicle to processed vehicle to departure by conveyance? And could it possibly point out that maybe the right rail equipment wasn't available or the truck equipment wasn't available? To your point, Brian, it would get into those individual segments and tell us whether it's a seasonality, it's a manufacturer-made situation, or it's a ocean carrier-made situation, or it is a carrier. Right now, we're talking all in generalities that say that we've got a problem and here's the spikes, but we don't have a consistent performance measure at each port. If there was an independent group, say the AIAG or someone like that, that put together a report for all of us that said that here is the report based on these parameters, would that be of value?
Marty, so you're looking at a sort of a blind report, sort of like Port of Tacoma versus Port of Richmond versus Port of Benicia. Because everybody should be looking at that internally, because there's a lot of factors that can affect that. If freight rates, if maybe you have some dated, if we have some dated freight rates, maybe we're not getting as many trucks as we should, or rail car forecasting. One company did a very good job rail car forecasting, say another did not. But overall for a particular port, perhaps. But, I look at, for instance, on the West Coast, for the different ports that receive product from Asia. The conveyance for a lot of that product is rail. And, there's truck as a component, but a lot of that is rail going to the interior of the country. So the conveyance and the problems with that particular conveyance can affect that dwell in the port. If you look at, if you're on the Atlantic coast with Asian imports, your conveyance is going to be truck. So, problems with trucking, but certainly you're not going to be affected by rail car shortages at that point. And the opposite can happen with European product coming to the Atlantic, or European product going to the Pacific.
Yeah, so TTX puts together something like that for the railroads, for the OEMs, and that is reported to them. For the truck, I'm not sure if that would be of much value, because we have two very different operations. What slows them down might not necessarily slow us down. So it's quite different. Different networks, different amount of dealers, different amount of carriers. So I see where you're going, but I'm not quite sure industry-wide it'd be of much value. Certainly within the OEM, definitely.
We actually do that reporting, Marty, for each of our Pasha facilities, and we look at it very carefully every day. It is valuable reporting to us. The comment that I would make, though, is that when we have problems with truck, when we have problems with rail, a lot of times they tend to be regionalized. So we may not have a problem in Grays Harbor that we have the same problem in San Diego and vice versa. And especially with truck. Truck on the West Coast is relatively good right now. It's something where we really don't have a significant shortage of truck. At various times we were concerned that maybe we did, but when we dug a little bit deeper, it was really the OEM making the decision to keep those cars there an extra day or two. So, and that's what led us to ask those questions. I like industry reporting. I think it's good to see if there are problem spots. I think that kind of information might be helpful at either Alice or one of the more centralized industry groups to be able to look at and bring to either the railroad's attentions or to the trucking company's attention, that maybe there's a region or an area that's suffering, and maybe the TTX model has to be looked at, things like that. So I think there's always good value in industry reporting, but they do tend to be a lot of times localized events and localized shortages.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more questions from the floor? Okay, thank you. Well, I think that draws us to a close of the discussion. I'd like to thank the panel for an interesting discussion there. Thank you. Just before I let you guys go off to have some more coffee, you have feedback forms on your tables there. I'd like to ask you to please fill them in. And of course, if you like the session and you like the moderator, my first experience of moderating, then please give me a high mark. If not, then please disregard the form.
I was going to mention this is Neemish's first time facilitating and being a moderator, so I think he did a great job, so he deserves a hand as well. Thank you, Neemish.
Thanks for making me look good. Thanks very much. We'll be back here at shortly, 4 o'clock, at 4 o'clock, and for the final panel session where we have a VIP panel there.